You may remember a while back I did a bonus interview with the lawyer Steven Donziger about the circumstances that led to his quite lengthy house arrest and his ongoing, I don't know, how do you say, persecution by a law firm prosecuting him and their relationship with the very people that he won a lawsuit against. So his trial's coming up, and we decided that we should check in again with Steven Donziger. So I'm joined once again, by the lawyer Steven Donziger. Steven, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me, Will. It's good to be here.
All right. So maybe for the people who haven't listened to the first episode or unaware of this story, could you give our listeners just like a brief background regarding your case and the rather extraordinary way in which you've been confined to your home for like well over a year and a half now?
Sure. So, it's a 27-year story, but I'm going to sort of reduce it to about a minute. I'm a lawyer, live in New York. Right when I got out of law school in the early 90s, I went down to Ecuador with a group of lawyers and investigators to look at what really was called the world's worst oil-related catastrophe. And it involves Chevron and its predecessor company, Texaco, over a period of 25 or so years in the Ecuadorian Amazon. They deliberately dumped billions of gallons of cancer-causing oil waste onto indigenous ancestral lands in about a 1,500 square mile area, wrecked the region, completely poisoned the water, the fresh water sources, the rivers, the streams, the groundwater. And over time, hundreds, thousands, and even thousands of people have died of cancer or been stricken with oil-related diseases. Indigenous cultures have been decimated, and it's really the world's worst oil-related catastrophe. It was done as a matter of planning and engineering. It wasn't an accident. Chevron decided to just dump the stuff rather than pay for a proper disposal. I got involved and sued Chevron, Texaco, then Chevron in New York in the early 90s. They insisted the trial be held in Ecuador. It was moved to Ecuador in the early 2000s. Chevron accepted jurisdiction there. The trial took 8 years. We won. There were massive, voluminous scientific evidence proving their guilt, their culpability, 64,000 sampling results, 100 expert reports. As we were about to win, they sued me in New York as retaliation, claiming that I had bribed a judge in Ecuador. And their evidence, I did not bribe a judge in Ecuador, just to be very clear about that. Their evidence, so-called evidence, was they paid a witness $2 million to come up from Ecuador. They coached him for 53 days. He then went into this courtroom in New York, in the same court where we originally wanted the trial to be held. And he testified that he was in a meeting with me in Ecuador where I approved this so-called bribe, and it never happened. There's no corroborating evidence. The witness ended up admitting that he had lied and recanting his testimony in a later proceeding. But on the basis of that, with no jury, Judge Lewis Kaplan, who's a federal judge in New York, found that I had obtained the Ecuadorian judgment via fraud. In the meantime, 29 other appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada have validated the judgment and completely rejected Kaplan's findings. This is really a battle between corporate power and indigenous rights being expressed through the means of the judicial system right now. And because we had so much success in holding Chevron accountable, Chevron went back to Judge Kaplan, claimed I owed them money for their court costs. They demanded to see my computer and cell phone to figure out where my accounts were. And that had all the confidential information on the case. When I appealed that request, Judge Kaplan charged me with criminal contempt of court and had me locked up. This was on August 6, 2019. It's about 575 days ago. My criminal contempt charge is a misdemeanor. The longest sentence ever given a lawyer who's been convicted of this is 90 days of home confinement. I've been in home confinement now 6 times.
This is an extraordinary part of this. I mean, you said like the longest penalty ever given to a lawyer who's been convicted of misdemeanor contempt is 90 days. You have not been convicted of misdemeanor contempt, and you have been confined in your house under house arrest for well over 500 days now.
Yeah, I've been confined 6 times longer. I'm confined without trial 6 times longer than the longest sentence ever imposed on a lawyer who's been convicted of these charges. So, in my view, this is punishment. I mean, and to understand what's happening, when you're charged with criminal contempt, you're charged by the judge, not by the regular prosecutor. but the judge is obligated to go to the prosecutor to do the case, to prosecute it. In this case, the prosecutor refused to prosecute me, refused the charges. So Judge Kaplan, who charged me, appointed a private law firm to prosecute me in the name of the government while hiding the fact the law firm had Chevron as a client, Chevron being the company that I had won this big judgment against. So essentially, I'm the first example of ever in U.S. history where the government, in this case, Judge Kaplan, has given big oil the power to prosecute its critics. And that's what's happening to me. It's a conflicted case. And it really, in my view, needs to be thrown out. And the fact that I'm the only lawyer in history on a misdemeanor ever held for even a day pre-trial makes it all the more shocking.
I mean, yeah, this is what, this is how I found out about your case. And this is what led me to be so interested in it is, I mean, like the terrifying idea of a lawyer or any private citizen being prosecuted by a private law firm on behalf of the state, and not just any private law firm, a law firm that has directly an invested interest in a client that you won a fairly adjudicated legal settlement against. It's just like it is very clear what's happening here, which is that like a Chevron and a private corporation is using the state and our legal system to not just punish you personally, but to send a message to anyone who would dare win a lawsuit against them.
That's exactly right. And fundamentally, this is about an attack on the people of Ecuador who won the judgment, and they're doing it through me. And it also, as you point out, is about sending a larger symbolic message of intimidation to all human rights activists, all human rights lawyers, and people who want to hold these big fossil fuel companies accountable for their environmental destruction. I mean, that's what this case is about. And like it's being expressed through these very personal attacks on me. I have a wife and a 14-year-old son, and we're hurting. I mean, we're in, we live in New York City in a relatively small apartment, and we've been here now for almost 2 years trying to figure this out. I can't get a trial because of COVID and other reasons. There's no trials happening in New York, and they won't let me out, and Chevron loves this. I mean, I haven't been convicted of a crime. I don't have a passport. I have an ankle bracelet, and it's been 18, 19 months now, unable to travel, unable to walk out of my apartment. That suits them fine, right? Because they don't want me working on the case and holding them accountable.
I mean, like, as more and more people are aware of this, I mean, when people find out about your case, I mean, like, you have attracted the attention and support of a lot of the really, luminous figures in the legal community, like of lawyers, judges, people in international law who have, signed petitions and statements attesting to the truly extraordinary miscarriage of justice that you're being subjected to here. I mean, like, it's just like, as this goes on, I mean, like, how do like Judge Kaplan and the people prosecuting you continue to justify this or account? I mean, or is it just simply that they don't have to because not enough people notice it, or they're not being subjected to like the pressure from any quarter outside like certain parts of the legal community, no matter how sort of august and impressive the names are?
Well, it's a great question. It just befuddles me that they can get away with it. There are a lot of people who've spoken out, great lawyers, Marty Garbus, Rick Friedman, some of the great human rights lawyers in our country. Amnesty International has written letters, and a lot of environmental groups. These two judges who are after me are conflicted. I mean, one is a former tobacco lawyer. The other is a member of the Federalist Society, to which Chevron is a major donor. They're working together. In other words, the judge who charged me appointed the judge who's presiding. She locked me up, Judge Preska. The prosecutor comes from a Chevron law firm. They all have financial ties to Chevron. I mean, Chevron is in effect prosecuting me. And I think for a lot of people, it's hard. There's no framework to even understand this in the United States of America. Like, you just talk and they're like, well, what? And we need more people to speak out. I mean, these judges have lifetime appointments. There's virtually no accountability. No one has tried to stop them. The appellate judges have not tried to stop them. They're like, oh, just let the trial happen, and if you lose, you can appeal it. I mean, that's like another 2 years while I'm in house arrest. So it's a serious situation, Will. I will tell you, I think this is a egregious human rights violation on American soil in the middle of Manhattan where I live. I'm a mile from the New York Times. They have not covered this. I have gotten coverage from independent media like you guys and, The Intercept and The Nation and others. Chris Hedges wrote a great story, but the large media outlets have completely ignored the story. Chevron's advertising dollars are all over the place. And I think, it's a real game for Chevron to try to contain the story such that most people don't find out about it, and the judges then have a free path to try to get away with it. But, we're fighting as hard as we can. If I was in Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Russia, I think there'd be a lot of members of the U.S. Congress speaking out and condemning my treatment, just like they're condemning the gentleman who Putin just jailed. Navalny, I mean, appropriately, that's not how you treat people. But, look at my situation. It's happening right here, and they don't speak out.
I think another element here is it like, if this was happening to you because you were a dissident against the U.S. state directly, I think it would that's easier for them to talk about, like in terms of the mainstream media, discussing the government directly violating or oppressing political speech, or just punishing someone for winning a lawsuit essentially. But the fact that it's not just the government doing it to you, it is a private corporation, like you said, it is Chevron prosecuting you with the authority of the U.S. state behind them. It like I said, it opens up all kinds of questions about the nature of our government and the media as it relates to these giant multinational corporations, that I think it's not so much that it's difficult for them to talk about it, but they don't know what to make of it, or they don't want to follow up on the implications of what this really means.
I think you're right. And I will say, those of us who follow comings and goings in America see the increasing corporate power that's permeating various aspects of our society over the last 20, 30 years. I can tell you, in this case, it's a new frontier. This has never happened. This is a new step forward for the consolidation of fossil fuel and corporate power in America. To be able to for Chevron to have its private law firm prosecute the lawyer who won the biggest judgment ever against Chevron and lock him up in his home, when no lawyer's ever been locked up in his home before for this supposed charge, which I dispute completely, that really ought to scare everybody, because it really is a playbook that the industry, the fossil fuel industry, is going to keep trying to use as long as they can get away with it.
And I would venture a guess that it's not just the fossil fuel industry following this closely. I think it's every major industry who looks at any attempt to use our courts to hold them to account or provide any level of redress for people who have been victimized by their policy, which is basically putting profit over human life.
That's exactly right. And, Chevron, for example, won't pay the $9.5 billion it owes to the people of Ecuador in a case that we won. It's been 10 years. Okay, people are dying in Ecuador because Chevron won't pay the judgment. Yet Chevron has lobbyists right now on Capitol Hill trying to preserve the $40 billion public subsidies for the fossil fuel industry that the Biden administration is thinking of getting rid of. They're grifters. They went down to Ecuador and sucked out profits out of the Amazon and left behind all the pollution for the local, for the vulnerable local communities suffer, and they're doing the same here. They live off taxpayer subsidies, and they're basically in Ecuador. What they did is they lost the case, and rather than pay, they're like, we're leaving, sold their assets, and Ecuador's left with the cleanup tab. In the meantime, they go after me because I helped hold them accountable by representing the indigenous groups down there, and they lock me up, so they have too much power. And if judges don't stop this kind of behavior, this misconduct, this abuse of the system, we are going to be living in a very dark place soon. And we already are to some extent, but people need to wake up and really look at this. And also, if I can say, we're signing up people. We have 25,000 people now on our campaign. And if people can help, please go to my website. It's called DonzigerDefense.com, DonzigerDefense, DonzigerDefense.com. You can make a donation. The costs to deal with this are significant, to deal with lawyers and expenses and that kind of stuff, although most lawyers work for very low cost on my team. But also, even if you can't give, please sign up for the campaign. We put out a newsletter every couple of weeks explaining what's happening, asking people to take various actions. Like right now, Amnesty International wrote a letter to Merrick Garland, the new AG, new Attorney General, asking him to review the case and take it back from Chevron's private law firm, take it back into the Department of Justice so we can deal with professional prosecutors, not conflicted, private prosecutors.
Yeah, I mean,
and
the
we're
whole idea of
asking
a
them.
private prosecutor is so bone chilling to think about. I mean, even if it's an unjust prosecution, the idea that like you should be prosecuted by a representative of the U.S. state, the Justice
Yeah,
Department, whose boss is accountable to voters theoretically.
that's exactly right. And I will add this. Judge Kaplan in the court created some sort of taxpayer fund to pay these private prosecutors, and they're billing taxpayers. Three of them are each billing $300 an hour. And so far, this is just what we know. They have been paid by taxpayers $464,000 to prosecute me in a misdemeanor when the United States Attorney's Office refused to take the case. So
Yeah.
again, grifter, right? Like,
I mean, what was it like?
Chevron's.
I don't even like. It's so hard to even figure out if you like, because I'm not an expert, but like as someone who has like a rudimentary understanding about how our legal system is supposed to work, if the prosecutor declines to prosecute a case, I mean, like, why shouldn't it end there? If they're saying, "Hey, we
It
passed,
should end
there's
there.
nothing here," so like, how did this get to the thing where the judge? It's this bizarre and rather open collusion between this judge and Chevron and their law firm.
That's exactly right. It's a Chevron prosecution facilitated by a judge. It's inappropriate. It's, in my view, unethical. It's a conflict of interest. It's unconstitutional, in my view, and it's illegal under international law. And it's happening in New York. So, yeah. And ultimately, I have great hope that I will get through this and some judge or some appellate court somewhere will stop this or at least reverse it. I mean, they're trying to put me in jail.
I mean, they already have put you in jail in a sense.
Well, they put me in jail in my home, and they're going to try to put me in jail without a jury.
And
They're denying me a jury.
Yeah, there's no jury trial for this, so it'll just be it'll be like up to the judge's discretion about.
It's up to the judge.
It's up to the judge to decide if the prosecutors that they appointed themselves met the standard for whether you're guilty or innocent
Exactly.
on a misdemeanor charge.
Yeah, but think about this: the judge who's locked me up for 575 days now is the judge deciding whether I'm guilty or innocent of the underlying charge.
I mean, the word Kafka-esque gets thrown around a lot, but man, Jesus, Stephen. I mean, I guess the other thing like this, the absurdity of this is the terms of your house arrest and confinement. You have not been convicted of this. You are awaiting trial on a misdemeanor, and you have an ankle bracelet. You have an ankle monitor on. How does that happen? Like there are people who get charged with murder who get to walk around free before their trial.
Yeah, I know. I mean, listen, the 4 cops who killed George Floyd are all free right now.
Yeah.
I'm locked up. And I what I did wrong, quote unquote, was win a big pollution judgment against Chevron. And it's obvious why this is happening. It's because Chevron has bent the will of a certain element of the federal judiciary to its wishes. And, we're supposed to have an independent judiciary to check that kind of power. Instead, Chevron has bent that to its will, and it's really controlling it. And that's the world we live in right now with this case. And it's really not right. It's frightening. And if it were happening in any other country, the entire U.S. Congress would be passing a resolution condemning it.
So, I mean, you're still awaiting trial, but like, is there a trial date set? Is there something coming up that is something's going to happen that'll like maybe just a break in this limbo that you're existing in right now?
So, a couple of things. There's 2 important dates. On March 10th, which is just a few days from now, I have an argument before the appellate court to get off home detention. And anyone can dial in and listen, and we're urging people to listen and to bear witness. You can go to this website that we set up for this purpose. It's called freedonziger.org, freedonziger, DONZIGER.org. We'll put the phone number on there once we get it a couple of days before the argument. It's at 10 a.m. Eastern on the 10th, which I believe is next Wednesday. So people should just mark that down and dial in.
And yeah, I just if I could make an appeal here, I mean, the fact that you can dial in and listen to this hearing, I think is very important. I think the more people do this, the better, because I think that this is basically being allowed to happen to you because not enough people know about it. And I think the more exposure that the absolute absurdity of what's happened to you here, I think if more people know about it, I think that is can only help your defense and can only hinder like I said, the open corruption and oppression of you that is being carried out by a private law firm on behalf of the government.
Yeah. And by the way, the law firm's name is Seward and Kissel, Seward, Kissel. Last week, 300 law students from 52 different law schools in America wrote their managing partner a letter saying they will never work at that firm. There's a boycott of the Seward and Kissel firm by law students to protest what they say is an unethical prosecution of me. So, there's a lot of people who are really upset about this. And the Seward and Kissel law firm, they have significant ties to the oil and gas industry. Chevron's a client. They work for a company called Oak Tree Capital. That's 2 executives on Chevron's board of directors. It's just unbelievable, And when Judge Kaplan appointed this law firm, first of all, when the case was rejected, it should have dropped. But he wanted to appoint a private lawyer to prosecute me. There's hundreds of disinterested, like neutral former federal prosecutors he could have appointed. Why did he appoint the one firm that has close and deep financial ties to Chevron and the oil and gas industry? Because he wanted to ensure that they would do what he wanted to try to crush me as so-called punishment for having the temerity to take on Chevron successfully on behalf of indigenous peoples. So this is a closed loop.
Do you feel like for people like Judge Kaplan to take this extraordinary step? I mean, like, do you think it's like in their view of the world or their view of the law, what you did to Chevron by bringing this case in the first place, much let alone winning it, it just amounts to basically extorting a private company? Like, I think is basically that how he looks at like people who seek, take environmental cases against large corporations. That it's just basically it's seedy, it's sort of pseudo criminal in the first place to even question or to even to even bring up the fact that like maybe they have some sort of monetary responsibility to the thousands of people who have been stricken with cancer as a direct result of their actions.
I think it's that. I think he just hates lawyers who take on the cause of human rights and the cause of environmental justice. I mean, he was a former tobacco industry lawyer. He worked for Brown and Williamson for many years. And he just thinks like the corporate form is like the best expression of like an economic system and American greatness, and it's really scary. He hated me from day one, I could tell. He never let me present evidence in the underlying racketeering case. He let Chevron file against me. He wouldn't give me a jury. He wouldn't let me testify on direct. He kept the names of witnesses secret from me. There were massive due process violations throughout in his court. And the irony is he concluded that in Ecuador, there were, somehow the trial court didn't function properly. When in his court, that actually was the case. And it was not in Ecuador, because I don't know if I've mentioned this yet. There's been 29 different appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada who have affirmed the validity of the Ecuador judgment. Judge Kaplan's the only one who said it wasn't valid. And he wouldn't even look at the evidence relied on by the Ecuador court to find that to find against Chevron.
And the whole, I mean, we talked about this in the first time you came on, like their whole effort to get the trial in Ecuador in the first place was something they thought would be very much to their benefit.
Yeah, they did until we organized a team of great Ecuadorian lawyers who litigated the case and presented the evidence and won, as they should have, because the evidence against them is just overwhelming. I mean, they admit it. They admit that this is what they did. They just claim it didn't hurt anybody, But they admit they dumped massive amounts of toxic waste into rivers and streams that indigenous peoples were relying on for their drinking water. And many have died, including young children of leukemia. I mean, babies are dying of leukemia down there. So, they just went down there and cut and run. I mean, they took out all the profits, socialized the costs, and fled the country. And then they come up here and act like, they can avail themselves of our legal system to attack those who held them accountable. It's really, again, it's unprecedented, and it's something people need to pay attention to, obviously.
You mentioned on the March 10th hearing about your confinement, but what was the second important date that's coming up for you?
That's the trial on May 10th, where I'm going to be represented by Ron Kuby, Marty Garbett, various lawyers who are working to help me pro bono, and they're really good lawyers. And they're going to be going toe-to-toe with this private Chevron prosecutor in court. And people can come to the court, potentially, it depends on COVID, but they can also listen in. And that trial could take several days. I'll be testifying. And we plan in that trial to show the truth of what happened, which is that I did nothing wrong. I was charged criminally as a way to silence me. Thousands of lawyers in America did exactly what I did to appeal a potentially unlawful discovery order. No one was ever charged with criminal contempt or locked up other than me. So obviously this is, I think, a selective, malicious prosecution. And there will be a trial, it won't be a jury. The conclusion, if Judge Pesca stays on the case, that's the judge appointed by Kaplan, who's a member of the Federalist Society, she'll definitely find me guilty. But let people be their own judges and bear witness. Listen to the evidence, because I believe I'm not the least bit guilty. But, if I had a jury, this would not be happening. And there's a reason they're not giving me a jury, because they want to engineer the result, in my view.
Well, I mean, Steven, just to close things out here, I mean, I've been thinking about you ever since, I first talked to you. I've been trying to, promote your case, because I just think I think just more people need to know about this, because I think the more people who knew about it, the harder it would be for these people to do what they're doing. And I'm not saying they would probably still be doing what they're doing, but could we get like you said, this is in Manhattan. Could we get the New York Times or any of the papers of record just to cover this trial, just to even mention what's going on here? It would seem to be a pretty compelling story from a news angle.
It's an incredible story. I mean, I'm a Harvard law grad. I was in the same class as President Obama, and I'm locked up for a year and a half in my home after winning the biggest environmental case ever. Why is that not being covered by the New York Times? I'm astounded. And, look, people need to engage, go to the website and sign up, because there's one group, I think Sunrise is organizing an event at the courthouse on March 10th to express their disdain, their upset at what's happening to me. And there's a lot of actions that can be taken. Again, go to freedonziger.org or donzigerdefense.com and just get engaged, because we need as many people as possible to speak out about this. Even if you're not around, if you live wherever, not in New York, you can call into these proceedings and you can send emails and stuff, and we'll tell you how to do it to really raise your voices in defense of me and my family and the people of Ecuador with whom I've worked for now 27 years, who really are tenacious, determined, sophisticated, courageous people who united indigenous peoples and rural farmer communities and took on one of the world's most powerful corporations and won. So this needs to be recognized. I want to say this.
No, I was going to say, in following your case, I've always been very impressed with, it obviously with the absurdity and horror of what's happened to you is one thing, but you've always been very clear that this is about Ecuador. This is about the victims.
It is about Ecuador.
of Chevron basically doing a Chernobyl level environmental disaster on purpose in their country. These are the people who are being oppressed by this corporate. This collusion of corporate and government power, this is the real violence, and it's directed at them.
Yeah, and then they're attacking me to attack the people of Ecuador. I'm like roadkill in between, because I'm here. But I mean, the people of Ecuador, the indigenous leaders and the community leaders are amazing. I mean, it's been a privilege to represent them all these years, and they won the case. Let me be very clear: Chevron has lost. The communities in Ecuador have won. And these attacks are happening because our side, the Ecuadorian leaders, won a historic judgment. So they're attacking their lawyer. It's that simple. This is not happening because they did something wrong or something went amiss. This is happening because they did something right and everything worked out. So that's why we need to protect this judgment.
And that's why they're attacking you, is because, like you said, this is the message that they're sending to every other lawyer in the country and in the world who looks at this case and goes, oh, I can think of 10 other examples of a corporation who's done something similar in the world. And maybe they should be sued for it. They should be held to account. And they know they're guilty as hell. I mean, and they know they lost the case.
And their entire lawfare legal strategy to try to destroy the case and go after me is in itself criminal racketeering. I mean, it's basically a conspiracy to put in false evidence, to pay a witness, this guy they paid $2 million to, as a way to bring down a legitimate judgment, one in the court of a sovereign nation that's been affirmed by 2 Supreme Courts, one in Ecuador, one in Canada, and 29 appellate judges. I mean, that's the racketeering conspiracy right there. It's the Chevron lawyers and the Chevron executives and their allies who have orchestrated this. And that is the very definition of a conspiracy. But they act like they're the ones protecting the rule of law. We're protecting the rule of law, the judgment that was won in Ecuador that needs to be enforced. And by the way, I just want to mention, we have a team. This case does not live and die based on what happens to Steven Donziger personally. We have other lawyers working on this internationally who are exploring ways to enforce the judgment against Chevron's assets, to force the company to comply with the rule of law and pay what they owe.
Well, I mean, Steven, I guess I just for anyone listening out there, I mean, who's hearing this and wants to get, who's interested in the case or wants to support. I mean, I just think everyone should think very seriously about what it would mean if they were allowed to not just get away with this, but to get away with it in such a way that almost nobody even is aware of it, or that there's no even outrage in the mainstream media or in any traditional source of any institution that's meant to be a check on this kind of power or this kind of abuse of power, I should say. I think people should consider very carefully what the implications of the larger implications of this case mean for not just your ability to challenge corporate power, but even more frightening, your ability to, what will be done to you if you successfully challenge corporate power in any way?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? I mean, if you're not successful, this kind of stuff tends not to happen. And I will say this, for those who really want to dig in and follow daily events, please follow me on Twitter at @SDonziger, Donziger. And you can get a ton of information about the case, multiple times a day on my Twitter feed.
All right, Steven, we'll have the links to your website. We'll have information about how to call into the trial on March 10th. Or just any way to support you. All the information and relevant links and information will be in the show description of this episode of the show. So I just, and finally, I just want to say, Steven, thank you so much for what you're doing. And I would just like to say, please stay strong and hang in there.
Thank you, Will, and I appreciate the support of you and the show. It means a lot to us. Thank you so much.
Steven Donziger, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, look into this case, and you will be interested, to say the least, if not terrified like I am. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone can support in some way, or call into the trial, or show up at the courthouse, or just spread just even the fact that this story exists on your own. It would go a long way, because as I said, it's very hard to imagine them being able to do something this outrageous. I mean, as powerful as these people are, and as unscrupulous as they are, it is very hard for me to imagine they would be able to do this so easily if more people knew about what was happening.